Welcome to the Walrus Talks, a new city with Concordia University. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I am the executive director of the Walrus. I'm a proud Concordia grad, and I live in a city, so I think I'm perfectly qualified to host this evening. How are you feeling? I think we can do a little better. Yeah. We are thrilled to be back here in person in Toronto at the Isabel Bader Theatre. We're also streaming live at thewalrus.ca. So a big hello to the over 500 households who are also registered for our live stream. If I listen closely, I can hear their emojis. Do you hear them? Thank you for tuning in. We encourage you all, whether you're in the room or online, to share this conversation over the next hour on social media. You can tag us on any of the platforms at The Walrus and use our hashtag Walrus Talks. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land that we're on here in Toronto. We are gathered within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. At the Walrus, we're really honored to carry on a long tradition of storytelling. And we encourage you to reflect on this land, and for those of you across the country or around the world joining us online, reflect on where you're joining us from right now. A bit about this year for the Walrus. We're turning 20. And we're celebrating 20 years of Canada's conversation, reflecting on who we are now. You can find our stories online at thewalrus.ca, in print, on newsstands, or by subscription. I know many of you are subscribers. You can also listen to our podcasts or be a part of our events like this one. And this work is made possible by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you all for being here, and to Concordia University for partnering with us on this event. Speaking of anniversaries, we've been around for 20 years, and we've been working in partnership with Concordia for 10 years. So to kick off this evening, please welcome Graham Carr, President and Vice Chancellor of Concordia University, and someone I'm pleased to call a friend.
Thanks so much, Jen. Great to be a friend of you, too. Thanks, everybody, for turning out this evening. It's really terrific to be back in Toronto. I'm back in Toronto with the Walrus. And I have to say, for me, this evening's especially meaningful because I'm here with three really fabulous ambassadors for the university. Jen, who you know, who's a thought leader among public intellectuals in Canada, and, of course, leading one of the great tribunes for meaningful journalism and meaningful exchange in Canada, the Walrus magazine. And on the panel, well, it's not really a panel, but among the speakers tonight, Natalie Voland. Natalie is a businesswoman and a real estate developer who's really a leader in ESG-motivated sustainable housing development. And in fact, yesterday had a major announcement in Montreal, and today was featured in La Presse, the major French language newspaper in Quebec. So if you have access to that, please, there's a wonderful story on Natalie. And in her spare time, she's a PhD student at Concordia. And also, I'm here this evening with Carly Ziter. So Carly is a professor in our biology department, and I have to say, an incredibly eloquent voice for the beauty, for the integrity, and for the biodiversity of urban ecology. And it may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but considering that most of the world's population lives in cities, that also means that for most people in the world, their first encounter with nature happens in an urban context. So looking forward to hearing Natalie and Carly and the other fantastic speakers on the roster tonight. As you know, the theme is a new city. And earlier today, I had the privilege to be a speaker at another conference in Toronto called City Age Toronto, Canada's Next 10 Million, which was looking at the challenges that Toronto in particular, but other cities are also going to be facing in the years ahead. For those of you who don't know Concordia, Concordia is a bit like Toronto Metropolitan or maybe even U of T in that we have two campuses, one right in the heart of downtown Montreal, a storefront campus, and the other 7 kilometers to the west in a residential area called Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. We have more than 50,000 students and 7,000 faculty and staff. So we're like a small city in and of itself. Whoa, whoa. And the reason I was speaking at that conference today is because 10 days ago we announced an ambitious project to fully decarbonize the physical infrastructure of our 80 buildings on 62 acres of land on the 2 campuses by 2040, which is our way, thank you, which is, the work is only just beginning, which is our way of living up to the commitment that we made to our community in the wake of COP26. So you're not here to listen to me, but I do want to give one last plug for Concordia, which is when we talk about cities, climate change, which is a real area of our expertise, you don't have to take it from me. The Times Higher Education Impact Rankings last year measured 1,400 universities around the world in terms of their performance against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And Concordia ranked 20th in the world for the work we do on climate action and 5th in the world for the work we do on resilient cities and communities. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here tonight. Great to have you. Enjoy the evening.
I mean, I had to say woo-woo for that. Incredible. Who here loves living in a city? Okay. Who here hates living in a city? It really depends on the day, and I will say in and out of lockdowns, there were moments I was ready to find a farm. We will be talking about farms tonight, though, so stay tuned for that. This evening, we are exploring cities and how to make them better, from eco-sustainability to transportation to housing, to stronger municipal governments. I feel even the word strong is loaded in a city like Toronto. But cities are grappling right now with how to envision a future that is durable but also flexible to meet the evolving demands of urban living. How can we shift urban development to make cities safer, more accessible, and overall stronger so they can work? Tonight, we will be reimagining our cities today and into the future. Coming up, we have Jeff Gray, Queen's Park reporter from the Globe and Mail. We have Carly Ziter, Assistant Professor, Department of Biology, and University Research Chair in Urban Ecology and Sustainability at Concordia University. We have Cheyenne Sundance, farmer at Sundance Harvest. Marco D'Angelo, President and CEO, Canadian Urban Transit Association. We also have Natalie Voland, member of Next Generation City Institute, PhD candidate, and president of Quo Vadis Capital. Joining us, Alkarim Devani, co-founder of Round Square, as well as Herbie Barnes, artistic director, Young People's Theatre. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Jen. My name is Jeff Gray, and I've been a reporter at the Globe and Mail for 25 years. I don't know, is that sympathy or I don't know? Feels weird to say that out loud, actually. I now cover Queen's Park, Ontario's legislature, but for too many years to have been healthy, I spent my days at the building I continue to call the clamshell, Toronto's City Hall. And I feel a little out of a place tonight as a mere reporter, I have to say. The panel, the people you're going to hear from, and the ideas and the caliber of the resumes here. You know, my introduction's the shortest. Reporter, that's what I do. But I think what I can offer is some insight anyway, based on years spent peering into the sausage maker that is local democracy in this province and in this city. It's a sausage maker that I think everybody would agree is a bit worse for wear. Just like the other sausage makers, the federal and provincial sausage makers are also, I think, a bit worn these days, but they're all worth fixing. Let's talk about cities. They're being asked to do so much of the heavy lifting in our society now. They're on the front lines of the housing crisis, the opioid crisis, climate change. But cities have actually, on paper in this country, very little power, and there's a pretty broad consensus that they don't have the money required to do all of these things we expect them to do now. And so these are the challenges, these are the things we've been covering, that I've been covering since I was a young pup. Our Constitution, conveniently, doesn't mention municipalities and leaves their fate completely in the hands of the province, as we learned in Ontario in 2018, when Premier Doug Ford slashed the number of city councillors in this city almost in half in the middle of an election. He's made a bunch of interventions in municipal affairs since, and in fact, it's just been a blizzard of changes to the way municipalities operate, the way they can charge developers, development charges, and all sorts of other things. Those of us paid to follow this, actually, we're having trouble. We're having trouble keeping up. So slow down, please, you know. Of course, it was mentioned off the top, the strong mayor powers. That's another example of the type of change he's made. This is different than the way we used to make changes to municipal governance in the 20th century. When Metro was created, it actually took 20 years for that process when Metro was created in the 1950s. I don't remember that. I think there might be some people who remember Metro out in the crowd. There's somebody waving back there. This obviously has provoked a reaction from a lot of people in municipal circles. How could we insulate cities from this kind of interference? It's worth mentioning, though, that the justification for all this interference is the housing crisis. That's the problem governments everywhere are trying to fix. So there's talk about charter cities. No one's been able to explain to me what a charter city is or how it would work or how that would stop Doug Ford from doing something to the City of Toronto, so we can leave that aside. Other people talk about constitutional changes. Good luck with that. And I think this has an effect, though. I mean, Sean McAuliffe in The Star argued recently that if you have a provincial government that is constantly changing the rules for municipal governments, we're going to have even more trouble convincing people to vote in municipal elections, because what's the point? Someone else has got the power. But there are some interesting things that maybe are happening as a reaction. There are a number of new local citizens movements across the province, anti-sprawl movements, very successful, although it was, of course, crushed eventually, but activists really pushed back against an edict to expand Hamilton's boundaries into farmland. So there are things like that that are happening, and maybe that portends a change in the way municipal politics are done. All right, so we fixed democracy. The next thing we need to talk about is the money. Cities simply, well, even at the moment, Toronto is grappling with these huge budget holes caused by COVID. Leave that aside. Even in normal times, cities in this country are way too dependent on property taxes. That has long been the consensus. They need other forms of revenue. But when you start to ask them, well, what other forms of revenue? What would you do? Everybody starts to sort of step away from the podium. When I covered David Miller, when he was mayor here, there was a push to get a piece of the GST for cities, which seems like a easy way to get someone else to collect the tax and you get to spend it. That's a good deal. What David Miller ended up getting was changes to the City of Toronto Act that resulted in a whole bunch of new taxing powers that no one in the city really wanted to use. Like, imagine getting reelected on a platform of, I brought in the booze tax. We did end up with the land transfer tax on home purchases, which has saved the city budget for decades, or a decade and a half, I guess. One radical idea that keeps coming up is the idea of cities should have their own income tax. Radical. Who would think of such a thing? I recently learned that until 1935, Ontario municipalities had the right to raise their own income taxes, but they never did it because people didn't like it. And there's a whole complicated story about the Depression, about why they were stripped of that power. One possible move we might see is tolls. Take a deep breath, it's okay. John Tory tried to do road tolls. Kathleen Wynne said yes, then she said no in 2016. They were commonplace in 19th century Ontario. I think Under this government, they're a complete non-starter at Queen's Park, but eventually, I think that's going to be a source of revenue that cities, not just Toronto, others, start to look at. Plus, it has other benefits as well. Here's an example of a city that actually successfully overcame that kind of political third rail around road tolls. Stockholm, 2006, wanted to do a London-style congestion charge, a cordon around the center of the city and charge cars coming in and out. People hated that idea, but Stockholm said, okay, a pilot project for 6 months, and then we'll have a binding referendum. If you don't like it, we'll take it out. And Stockholm residents voted in favor of that congestion charge after having it for 6 months because it made traffic flow better and they saw the revenue coming in that the city could use for other things. So local democracy at work. The sausage maker worked. So cities to succeed, I think, need to become better democracies, and they need money. And we might just fix that sausage maker. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carly Ziter, an ecology professor at Concordia University. We just heard a little bit about roads, a little bit about housing. I too study urban infrastructure, but maybe not the kind you think of when you imagine a new city. The urban infrastructure I study isn't cutting edge or high tech or wireless. It's old and low tech and rooted firmly in place. You see, I study trees, also flowers, occasionally birds, bees. And the reason I care so much about this living urban infrastructure is that with over 70% of Canadians living in large cities, it forms the main contact with nature for so many of us. Some of you might not have expected to hear about nature tonight until Graham gave me away. So nature is what we find, in Algonquin Park. Nature is what we find on tropical vacations for those of us lucky enough to have experienced one. And in comparison, it's really easy to dismiss that maple tree on the corner or the bumblebee in your vegetable garden as utterly ordinary. But when my students and my colleagues study that ordinary nature, when we measure your backyard trees and install temperature sensors in your parks and catch the bees and butterflies to learn what they need to thrive, our science tells us that those urban forests are protecting us from deadly heat waves, including the 50% of trees that grow on private property, your trees, if you're lucky enough to steward one. The community gardens supporting those bees not only provide us with healthy food, but improve our mood, our memories, our connection to communities. Those of us who study it learn time and time again that this ordinary neighborhood nature yields extraordinary benefits. And if we're not careful, if we're not deliberate about the way we build our cities, we stand to lose that. We make a lot of big promises. We're going to increase urban biodiversity. We're going to plant trees. We're always going to plant so many trees. We're going to improve access to green space, access for everyone. But actions speak louder than words. When we look at those beautiful designs of new developments, they always seem to show happy people walking among the trees and the flowers. But when budgets get tight, often those trees and flowers seem to be the first thing to go. And when we need a new transit hub or a warehouse, we're awfully quick to downgrade or to dismiss the value of that woodland or wetland, especially if it's in a poor neighborhood. And I don't blame any single person or profession for this. It's just that somehow we've let urban nature become a nice to have and not a must have. It's become okay for this living infrastructure to fail, to be lost in a way that we wouldn't accept for other elements of our city. So how do we elevate nature in our cities? This is the part where I give you a quick fix, right? Like 3 steps for urban nature, where I tell you to install a beehive on your roof to save the bees and get some good PR in the process. But the thing is, these quick fixes that aren't grounded in evidence, in research, can sometimes contribute to the problem. Those really popular rooftop beehives are full of non-native livestock species that our research shows may actually be harming and not helping our hundreds of wild bee species in our Canadian cities. Would you get a backyard chicken coop to save the endangered birds? I give this example not to shame, but to emphasize that a transition to a greener, a more biodiverse city won't come without effort, without learning new ways of doing things. And when we relegate nature to a nice-to-have, to an aesthetic add-on, we negate the skills and expertise needed to make this ecological transition. So how do we elevate nature in our cities? When we make decisions about the cities of the future, we need to ensure that trained ecologists, biologists, farmers have a place at the table with the engineers and planners and politicians. We need knowledge and funding and follow through. And for those of us who aren't at that decision-making table, I'd really implore you to be supportive of a little short-term sacrifice. Making more space for nature means accepting less space for cars and parking lots. It means letting go of neat, manicured lawns full of species we've brought from elsewhere and embracing messier spaces filled with native plants that maybe look a little wild. And it means sharing our spaces, getting together with our neighbors, and ensuring our city officials know that our few remaining green spaces aren't just empty spaces waiting for buildings. They're spaces that are already full of life and opportunity for connection. It means putting that local democracy we just heard about to work. And it means that we can't only plant new trees. We need to stop cutting down the old ones too, even if they're in a spot that's a little inconvenient. A new city requires a new perspective on nature where we value it highly as the critical infrastructure that it is. And growing that new, greener city won't be easy, but I think it will be worth it. And I think we owe it to future generations to try. I asked my brilliant grad students the other day what they would say if given 7 minutes to defend what we study in our lab. Why I send them out to measure backyard trees and catch bees in the park and install temperature sensors all around town. They gave really great answers that I stole and included in this speech to you, but I'll share one that really resonated with me. The one that I used in my introduction. My student Bella said, "Tell them their kids will experience nature first in a city." Most children born this generation, not just here in Toronto, not just in Canada, but across the globe, will primarily experience nature, will form their core relationships with our beautiful, spectacular planet in a city. And the good news is, by raising your voice for urban nature today, we have so much potential to make sure that that relationship is a good one. Thank you all for your time.
Hello there. Hi, everyone. My name is Cheyenne Sundance, and I'm really excited to speak, mainly because I had laryngitis a week ago. So this is my first time I'm speaking in 7 days. So this better be worth it. Well, mainly for you all. So my name is Cheyenne Sundance. I'm a farmer with Sundance Harvest. Maybe some of you have seen the very fun boots I'm wearing here on an Instagram feed, but I do farm. We have chickens, we have mushrooms, we have bees, we have vegetables, we have flowers, we have all of that stuff in 3 locations. But you might be wondering, well, why is she here? It's a city. Well, but one of our locations is actually in Downsview Park. How many of you have heard of Downsview Park? Maybe a hands up. Whoa, that's a lot of people. So maybe you came to the farm stand, maybe I was, knee-deep in some mud, and you saw me. I would have said, hey, this is Sundance Harvest. So we started in 2019. I was 22 years old, pretty unorganized like I am today without a speech, but it was really fun, and it still is. And I started with 800 square feet. That is really small, the size of my apartment, I would say, and maybe the size of your apartment if you're lucky and you live in downtown Toronto. But also, right now, when you think about what an acre is, that's around, 44,000 square feet? So we have 4 of those. So starting in 2019 with literally 800 square feet of half of a greenhouse, and then now with 4 acres was kind of a big feat. But I'm here to talk about how the city made that possible for me. Urban agriculture will never feed cities, it never has, except, maybe in the future, psych, that won't happen. We always need farmland, and there's a reason for that. The large part of our calories don't come from backyard radishes or someone's basement microgreens, even though we all want that kind of to happen. But instead, it actually comes from migrant workers who are seasonal, who actually produce Canada's food. When you think about the farmer, it's not Luke, Matthew, or John. It's actually someone else who clearly probably looks like me. And the coolest thing about rural farming is that we need someone to replace those who are getting older. There's going to be a need to replace people who are doing cash crops. Large-scale industrial agriculture doesn't have to be a bad word at a farmer's market. It can look pretty cool. You can think about heritage grain farms like Against the Grain. That was a really awesome heritage grain farm in southwestern Ontario. It's gone, right? We need more supports for agriculture, but we also need more supports for youth. And as someone who literally never farmed a day in her life and never had an actual job before, you can come to me after if you want to learn what that was. But I really just figured it out. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I used the Toronto Public Library Services. Shout out to them. Awesome. And aside from that, I made a lot of mistakes. The hardest thing, though, there wasn't a space for me to make mistakes. Urban agriculture in itself is that space. It should be a space like any other trade. Like Humber College has an amazing trades program that my friends are in. Why don't we have a space in the city to train young people who are in the city to then learn how to farm, learn some crucial technical skills, and then move out rural to revitalize those areas that are so keen to be sprawled? Isn't that one way we could save farmland if we have more youth feeling like they can actually get involved with something? Like, hey, that farmland that you want to make a McMansion, I can actually grow on that for years to come. So that's kind of what I do. I run an incubator farm at Sundance Harvest at our Downsview site. That is one, again, of our 3 sites, because we have a Guelph site where my bok are, which are chickens, and then I have my flowers there, and then we have a Bolton site. But at Downsview, we teach 11 farmers right now who are all young, youth, subjective. We teach 11 farmers who are all young how to farm. And by young, I mean under 60, but really, yeah, young. So with these farmers, though, the cool thing about this is that half of them are subsidized. I actually did a fundraiser to subsidize half of the farmers to start their own businesses. So our incubator is at 1.5 acres in size. They grow food. They learn from me, which is subjective if they'll learn anything. But they will learn something like marketing. And they sell all their vegetables to our produce box that we give to many people across Toronto who buy our vegetables. The second cool thing about Sundance Harvest is that we pay a living wage. We're probably the only farm I know rurally or in the city that pays the highest entry-level wage in agriculture, to my knowledge, because we pay $24 an hour paid vacation. And the way we can, no, don't clap for that. Okay, I don't have a lot of time, guys. The way we can do that is because we don't have any surplus profits. But the sad thing is, sad violin music. We have to leave Downsview. We're leaving this September. So the incubator farm you just heard about, it's gone because there's not a place that I would imagine in a new city that would have for young people to be able to get involved in agriculture that's subsidized. So I was actually subsidizing my labor to run this incubator, but sadly I can't afford, at least that's actually double my salary I make in a year. So in Downsview Park, we had to leave, but my idea and my vision for a new city is to have a space similar to what I created, my blood, sweat, and tears for those 3 years I put in there, and to have that run by a nonprofit or organization that gets government money or provincial money to actually run a sustainable incubator for young farmers, to have an opportunity to literally try it out. Because how are we going to have cool, hip, young farmers try things out and move rurally if they can't drive? Because that was me. I just got my license last October. And, I'm thinking about Elle, Nico, I think about Siki, I think about Cassidy, I think about, Aiden, all my crew members who work for me and all my incubators who don't drive, who can't make it rural, but now they're all farming, and now they're all following me rural. That really wouldn't happen if it wasn't for cities. But again, we really, really do need a place like Downsview that is run by nonprofit. But aside from that, I have some time left, and I'm going to tell you a bit about what I do, but also a bit about what I don't do. So growing food in the city is quite interesting. The incubator program in itself is revolutionary because it doesn't just say, hey, just grow food. It says, hey, grow food and make a living, make a career. And our incubators actually make income from the food that they grow for our CSA, which means produce box. Sorry to use an acronym. But aside from that, I'm going to end it off with, yeah, I am a farmer. I grow food. I've never done this before. I am doing this now. I'm, 26? Just turned 26. And I run through 3-location farm, and I teach youth every single year how to run their own. So let's have that in the city.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening. Marco D'Angelo, I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Urban Transit Association, otherwise known as CUTA. It's an honor to be here with you today. Firstly, thank you to the Walrus for the invitation. At CUTA, we focus on the role that transit systems play in building livable cities. So Canada saw record population growth last year. 2022 was the first year we grew by over 1 million people. But what does that mean for public transit? So let's talk about the growth of Canada's cities and the connection between transit and housing. How are we going to welcome new Canadians without the homes to support them? Levels of government are beginning to address this question. But at CUTA, we've taken this question one step further. Can our population grow while building livable, sustainable, and connected cities? For years, we've been ignoring some of the fundamental laws of sound urban planning, overlooking things that make sense and making things overly complex. All too often, housing policies overlook public transit. This only compounds the issues that are facing our cities. So this brings me to the first law that we're breaking, the law of density. When it comes to transportation investment, we often prioritize the wrong things. We invest in widening roads, we invest in new highways, and we look to our natural spaces as places to build more homes. As cities continue to grow outward, our transportation systems are stretched to the limit. This leads to longer commutes and higher transportation costs, and ultimately more congested cities. So it should come as no surprise that Toronto is the 3rd most congested city in North America. We could see it with our own eyes. Traffic's back. So density must be a priority because generational decisions are being made today. So this is something that we've got to get right. The next law we're breaking is the law of proximity. At CUTA, we see transit and housing as a single solution. So building housing near transit hubs will allow people to access jobs, schools, and essential services in a more affordable way. This is why governments need to incentivize more housing near transit hubs to create 15-minute cities. So I'm talking about a community where a person's daily needs are within a 15-minute walk, bike, or transit ride from their home. You could think about that next time you're stuck in traffic for an hour. But we can reduce our reliance on this single occupancy vehicle with better pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, and of course, more frequent transit. We can reduce our reliance by helping governments to recognize transit as one of the most powerful emission reduction tools to reach our climate targets. We know that transportation is a quarter of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. We've got to address that transit is an available solution, and that's why we're so adamant that we meet those targets by 2030, and that's why we've been even transitioning our fleet to zero-emission vehicles in recent years. Young Canadians are especially worried about climate change, and they want to be part of the solution. So we need to create the possibility of a lifestyle that meets this generation's aspirations. We also need to look at land use policy. Government needs to make it easier to acquire land for transit-oriented development. In Vancouver, for example, the agency that runs transit there was recently permitted to purchase land around transit stations for housing and community amenities. Previously, that was restricted just for transportation projects. So if we rethink our approach, this allows us to draw a straight line between residential, business, and leisure space within walking distance of transit. The next law we're breaking is the law of affordability. All too often, building new transit infrastructure increases property values and prices out low-income families. Housing affordability is the most significant challenge facing young Canadians today. A one-bedroom apartment in downtown Toronto to rent is now going for over $3,000 a month. Imagine the strides we could take if we get serious on including co-op housing in our plans. In order to have vibrant and diverse cities, governments need to mandate rental and affordable housing near transit. We need to design cities that meet the needs of everyone, putting at the heart those who rely on public transit as their primary mode of transportation. The City of Chicago offers grants for equitable transit-oriented development to incentivize that sort of progressive planning. We need to rethink our approach. When transit is at the center of our cities, it makes life more affordable, and it supports more equitable urban growth. We know public transit is an economic engine in our region. A recent U of T study confirmed this. They indicate that the economic impact of the TTC on our region, it says every dollar invested in transit generates $2.40 in economic activity. And most encouraging, every $1 million invested in transit helps to create 15 long-term new high-paying jobs. So this leads me to the final law that we need to be mindful of. The law of gravity. What goes up must come down. In Toronto, we're seeing investments by the province and federal governments to build record public transit infrastructure. This will be great. But what we're not seeing is an investment in operating today's transit to maintain those service levels. So operations are what hold back the opening day of all of this new beautiful transit infrastructure. This mismatch simply makes no sense. In the City of Toronto, new transit lines are being built while the TTC this year is being forced to reduce service to existing lines. So what can we do? We need to come together to envision the cities of tomorrow. Population impacts housing. Housing impacts transit, and transit impacts our economy, which prompts the question, wouldn't it be nice to live in a truly sustainable, equitable, and affordable city? Thank you to the Walrus for allowing me to speak and the need for action to address these critical issues. Thank you.
I'm a little shorter. Good evening. My name is Natalie Voland. I am the President and Chief Strategy Officer at Gestion Immobilière Quo Vadis and Quo Vadis Capital. I started my career taking a degree in poli-sci, African studies, went into social work, thought I could work for UNICEF, ended up working for the YMCA, the Montreal General and Trauma Intensive Care, turned to real estate, became a community builder, and an ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance activist. I was called a dreamer. I was called nice. I was called Mother Teresa of real estate. I then later became an innovator and a trailblazer. But who cares what I was called? What do we call the future of our city? What is the role of our city? Since 38% of our carbon footprint is based on cities or the built environment, we need to figure out how do we build sustainable, all the way up to regenerative, inclusive, accessible, affordable, healthy, and nature-based cities. I was lucky enough to be part of Montreal's climate plan by the Mayor Valérie Plante in 2020, figuring out what we were needing to do for 2030 and 2050. As a private developer, the only one in the room, we realized that, oh my goodness, we will never achieve those targets that we're about to write. What can we do and how can we do it? The traditional real estate model has a typical goal, the golden rule of location, location, location. It is considered a long-term asset, but how did it become that now we need short-term returns between 5 and 7 years? The process is completely and utterly broken for private developers. We look at location, we figure out a project, then we go back and forth and try to figure out how we can zone it, design all the architecture around it, spend a whole lot of money, and then only look at what is our return on investment, which is the ROI. The problem is, how did real estate become from a long-term investment to a short-term process? Why does it not work? We are thinking short-term for the cities that we build. Business plans are built in boardrooms. They're built for return, not for humans or nature. The affordable concept that we're trying to talk about in a city right now is really just the ability of someone to pay for our apartments or our condos. How do we do that? We build smaller units. We don't actually take something off of our product. However, we also are worrying now about what is our quality of life in smaller units. We're building with not good building materials that are cheaper and last less time. Life cycle analysis, not happening in the private industry. Construction waste, a whole lot of it. We also have negative equity where people are buying condos thinking that they're gonna be creating some sort of value until the condo association calls and says we need a new roof because we didn't build a roof for the long term. We have to rethink the process. We need to start with purpose. What are we building? For whom? Who are we designing it for? And how long are we designing it before we have to rebuild it? What is the role between our private space and our public need for the community that we're in? But how? What are we missing? How can I personally find the answers? The problem is that if we actually design with purpose, we can build flexible, modular, low-carbon cities. Because something that we've always been missing in real estate for a long time is the H. We need to invest in humans in our return on investment. So what has been really exciting is I'm trying to figure out what am I gonna do as a social worker and a climate activist, as a private developer. I want to be able to accelerate climate mitigation in the built environment. Along comes Concordia. What I think is really amazing with Concordia is their whole concept of applied research. Academia and business working together side by side. Why? Because we can scale the change. From data collection to modeling to implementation, we can evaluate and improve what we want to do. I'm working on my PhD in my spare time. That's a joke. I was lucky enough to meet Dr. Ursula Eicher, who is the original first person in on the Next Generation Cities Institute. And there, I was brought into the fold because I was trying to figure out what are the barriers and opportunities for private developers to build new construction or retrofit existing buildings to mitigate climate neutral. Complicated slide. What is our answer? An accelerator, a really easy one that we can learn from very quickly called ABC. Also, it works with accélérateur de barre carbone in French because it works really well. So I called some friends. and I said, how do we turn all these no's into yeses? How can we find a way that we can apply the process of what I'm doing in my real estate projects, but apply them to other developers across Canada or even the US? So we've tried to figure out who are all the different stakeholders, from developer, researcher, government, architects, engineers, energy suppliers, legal authorities, financiers, our bankers, construction teams, and building managers. What was really, really exciting is that we were able to get very high-placed people to come and sit on an accelerator at Concordia University for free, so that we can actually figure out what do we need to do around public space, buildings, energy systems, and then we created a whole performa or a process around making sure that we can give people what is better than business as usual. What is our ABC version of what we can actually help other developers for free learn how to do so that they can integrate it into their buildings, not just my own. We also created something called the next generation version of this, where something that's super important for us is to figure out what is the process. We created a systems map. It's an interlaying loop of trying to figure out what affects what between all the stakeholders to be able to figure out what makes the most amount of sense. Where do we get the best bang for our buck to get most private developers to be able to change things? Why private developers? Because city building, from the cities, they don't have as many buildings as private developers do. Institutions, universities, those are all super important. However, it's the private developers that have the most amount of property, whether new or old. So, in closing, I would like to say that I am now an applied system thinker. I'm a collaborator. I hold a part of the puzzle piece where we could work together to get there, to build the cities that we want. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the evil developer. They had to have the superhero. My name is Alkarim Devani, and I'm from Calgary, Alberta. Generally speaking, I'm often embarrassed to share that, but with Doug Ford here, I feel good about myself. When Emma at first asked me to come down to talk to a bunch of Toronto urbanites, I said, are you sure? I'm from Calgary. Like, do these people want to hear from me? So I'm incredibly thankful to be here and thankful for the Walrus to put on such an amazing an event and such an important topic. I do want to start with acknowledging the lands that I'm from. I feel an incredible deep sense of accountability, particularly as a developer, to make spaces more inclusive, accessible, regardless of race or socioeconomic status. As you can see on my slide, we are at an unprecedented and terror-exciting time, I feel. I mean, everything is evolving at such an incredible pace, including our behaviors, habits, and social norms. You can work from home, skip the dishes, get Amazon at your door, metaverse, never have to leave your house. I feel like that's probably a conversation for another day, but we've proven to be incredibly adaptable and intelligent as a race, but still polarized by fear and negativity. And unfortunately, I don't have all the answers, but I'm actually pretty optimistic. The vast majority of people, I believe, are good. We all want to do the right thing. And so that being said, I have one small idea that I think can make a difference, and I'll talk about it through my story. These are my late parents, originally from Gujarat. They fled Uganda in the 70s during the time of Idi Amin. Neither of them spoke English, and when they arrived in Canada, my dad ended up getting a job at the CB Rail. He worked there for 30 years and retired and got his pension. And my mom started a very successful catering business. When they first arrived, they lived in an illegal secondary suite. This was the beauty of Canada, and I'm sure many of you have very similar stories, and I'm indebted to this place for that. Below, that's me and my brothers. I'm the fat, chubby guy with the jewels in the middle. And the guy with the buck teeth is my eldest brother, Afshin, who I co-founded Round Square with, which I'll talk about on my next slide. I want to talk about the homes that I grew up in. So on the top left corner, I lived here until I was in grade 3. Not very long, but I can still visualize it and remember it like it was yesterday. I remember lying in the grass and seeing the big, tall, mature trees dancing in the sun. I remember the tight streets, running, biking, ball hockey in the alleys. I remember how close my neighbors used to live. Almost too close at times because I'd get picked on for my house always smelling like curry, but I would give anything to have that back today. We knew everyone, and my parents felt comfortable with me crossing the lane and exploring the streets. The streets were tight, the cars were loaded out the back, and we used to walk to all the local dukans, my parents were called it, which were the shops. They were in abundance, and I couldn't help but feel like my parents knew this type of living when they used to live in India. However, like I said, my mom was always on the come up. She was an aspiring entrepreneur. Eventually, she bought this amazing home in this lakeside community. It was 2,000 square feet. We had the double-attached front-loaded garage, a massive yard. And I remember my whole family's like, yeah, we made it, we did it. But my memories of big trees and playing and knowing my neighbors started to fade. And I actually don't have vivid memories of living within this neighborhood. I do remember the shitty cul-de-sac and the lack of sidewalks and this green space in the middle that we never really knew what to do with. And I always thought that I was sad about my experience of moving because I missed my school and friends, but I realized as I reflect now, it was the power of planning. It was the power of actually being able to live close and be connected to one another and know your neighbors. And so like T.S. Eliot said, I'm back. This journey's brought me back to where I started, not only in my real estate career, but also where I love to live most in my life. And over the last 20 years, I've worked only in established areas. We went from building single-family homes to 200-unit apartments with heritage restorations. But like I said, I've arrived back at this amazing built form that I believe can make a huge difference in our lives. I recognize that apartments will always be wonderful, and the density is required specifically in cities like Toronto when there's so much pressure for housing. But I believe the missing middle housing that was sprinkled throughout some of our communities, but now which was widely found throughout Europe, was zoned out of existence. Due to dudes like this, Robert Moses and Harlan Bartholomew, who recognize minorities like myself love to live in multi-generational housing. And the way to segregate us was through single-family zoning. I think it's so important for us to unpack the past in order for us to move into the future. And my hope is that this housing forum can deliver housing diversity, that we can help serve people from all stages, ages, and wages. Like I said, this isn't no to apartments, it's both. We must deliver housing options and remove the vitriol that exists with redevelopment of single-family neighborhoods. As I mentioned, I am an optimist. However, with you folks recently loosening the belt versus doing the hard work, I do get nervous. And so I think it's important to note that gentle density is an absolute catalyst for change and can make a huge difference within our Canadian neighborhoods. And so this is my call to action. It's pretty simple. I think most believe that it's this generation that will actually cause the change to transpire. But I'm actually pretty confident these folks are going to be okay. They have ChatGPT and a bunch of other technology tools that will help them. It's actually these people that I'm most concerned about and I believe will actually cause the change that we need. I think our seniors or elderly are often overlooked, and they actually own the vast majority of established area homes within these communities. I think it's important that we authentically talk about aging in place and finding ways to keep our seniors within these neighborhoods. And until we do, I don't believe this change is possible. We're talking about $70 trillion worth of wealth transfer. And although that's a quantitative value, my hope is that we can qualitatively make a difference, genuinely care about our seniors, and find a way to keep them within our existing communities. Thank you so much.
Honey, hello. My name is Herbie Barnes, and I'm the artistic director at Young People's Theatre. I'm going to throw on my glasses. I noticed that I was up there under the Gen X. That was me with the... It's good to be part of your conversation. I think of Toronto as a village, a large village. I come from a village mentality. My father was from the village of London, England. He left and came to Canada, where he found my mother, an Anishinaabe woman from the village on Manitoulin Island, 5 hours north of Toronto. Growing up, our home was run like a First Nations home, and by that, I mean this. No matter how poor we were, there was always enough food for everyone, family or not. If you were there at dinner time, you ate. There was always a place for a guest to sleep, no matter how crowded the house was. I was always taught to be a good First Nations person, even though my mother was no longer considered First Nations. You see, by falling in love and marrying my father, my mother lost her native status. But for me, I was born 6 months before their wedding. I've been full status since birth. Strange, I know, but that's our government. So what does all this have to do with building arts in the city or a village? Well, a village is not based on buildings, sorry. Although, as an aside, Toronto boasts the most cranes in the air, 252 cranes last summer. The second highest city was Los Angeles with 51 cranes. The construction of many buildings is not an indicator of a powerful village. The true indicator of strength is how we develop and build the character of our young people. With strong young people, our city will grow to greatness. Of course, we work in order to create shelter, to survive. But we survive so we may enjoy beauty and art. To survive in Toronto, I read that you need to make $22.08 per hour and work more than 40 hours a week. Minimum wage in Toronto is $15.50. Now here's an interesting fact. Apparently, pre-contact, it only took 11 hours of work per week in order to survive. The rest of the time was spent on creating art. Indigenous people educated our young people about the beauty of nature, the splendor of creation. And when children are raised in this belief, they learn not only to appreciate beauty, but they also feel compelled to care for it, to care for the earth, to keep it for the next generation. Now, let's consider the next generation. Our young people have been isolated for more than 2 years. The effect of the isolation is huge. They need to catch up on the core subjects that some of them fell behind with online learning. The prevailing opinion? Let's get these kids back on track with the basics. The arts can wait. We need to support businesses that struggled through their pandemic. Again, the arts can wait. Why do we need arts in Toronto? Well, if we think of theater as a fun little distraction from everyday life, we can look away from it for a while. But we all know that it's not a distraction. Theater is a set of tools allowing us to explore who we are, to learn about our neighbors in the village. Theater can introduce us to the unknown. Now, we all fear the unknown, and of course, so do children. It's like the monster under the bed. It's scary. We can fight to kill the monster, or we can turn on the light to see what it truly is. Theater and the arts are simple ways to turn on the lights for young people. Early on as my tenure of as artistic director, we were talking to our board about the many actors who had their start at Young People's Theater. As students, before they went on to illustrious careers. Kiefer Sutherland was one of ours, yeah. So was Drake. But more importantly to me, 3 of our board members chimed in to say that they too had their first theatrical experience at YPT, watching shows or attending our drama school. Those classes gave them the confidence and inspired their creativity, provided them with a collaborative approach to their everyday life. Yes, we can cite the performers that fill our stages across Canada, who learn their trade from our amazing arts educators, or we can focus on the facts that many, many regular folks learned life skills at Young People's Theatre in our 57-year history. The team building skills we offer inspire an open and inclusive mindset that set our young people on a path of understanding. Theater, by its very nature, is a team building exercise. One that calls for collective thought between performers, playwrights, designers, and audience. Theater can, quite simply, be the medium to build a better, more empathetic, and more collaborative human being, and therefore a better society, a better, stronger village. Where can our young people go today to immerse themselves in community beyond the virtual world? When young people come to theater, in fact, when anyone comes to theater, a strange and wonderful thing happens. For the duration of the play, the audience lives are in a collective experience. They are experiencing the same thing
at the same time, just like you are tonight. Studies show that even our hearts begin to beat at the same rate. Our breathing becomes syncopated. In my theater, YPT is a repurposed heritage building. It was designed to hold the horses that moved the streetcars in Toronto and eventually to repair those streetcars. Around 50 years ago, Ebe Zedler transformed the facility into Young People's Theater, and for the last 10 years, my co-leader of the company, really my leader of the company, Nancy Webster, has been reimagining and working to raise money to serve our young people even better. The pandemic gave us the opportunity to make some changes, to expand our facilities, and to open our doors even wider. Not only a bigger facility, but a better, more inclusive space, accessible to all. Today, YPT boasts not only our beautiful redesigned 2 theaters in our heritage building, we also own YPT 161 Studio across the street. Across the street are offices, a costume shop, 3 beautiful education studios sit alongside a full-side rehearsal designed by KSA architects. Each space has floor-to-ceiling windows so that you can look in and see what's happening there. Now, when I joined the team, I walked through the space mid-construction, and I dreamt about the fingerprints at the bottom of each of the windows. Evidence that every child who dropped in would be gazing to see the wonders inside each room. The actors in rehearsal, the sewers creating costumes. I figured there'd be a lot of low window cleaning. The truth is, we're cleaning the whole window. Because our young people don't only want to see in, they want to be seen. Our staff here, the students plead with their parents, please come early so you can see my rehearsal. Come early to my school. Come look at my art on the walls. At YPT, we need 4 walls to house our dreams. But more importantly, what we're really building is a future. The building that houses the arts creates leaders of tomorrow, leaders of our community, leaders of our village. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Jeff Gray. The rules of the game are changing for cities, and it's even hard for journalists to keep up. Also, we need to keep talking about taxes. I feel you were just getting started there. Thank you, Carly Ziter. Cities have nature that protects us, so thank you to nature. Cheyenne, Sundance, cities can have farms. They can start with 800 square feet, a bit bigger than the space I live in, and we can train young farmers to have more Cheyennes. Marco D'Angelo, Canada is growing quickly. We're breaking laws, and planning better can create a new lifestyle with transit. Natalie Voland, the H, invest in humans. Flip the script, change the formula. Alkarim Devani admitted he is from Calgary and highlighted that our homes are our stories and our families, and we need to design them with care. And Herbie Barnes, I have to say you brought a tear to my eye the way you expressed that. When we create art, we create villages. A big round of applause for all of our talkers this evening. Now, I'm going to ask our talkers to get up so they have a head start to make their way out to the reception. And while they do that, I'm going to tell the rest of the audience a bit more about what we have coming up at the Walrus. If you enjoyed tonight's talks, and it sounds like you did, we have more coming up. On Thursday, May 11th, we are hosting the Walrus Talks. It's happening now, also presented by Concordia University. This will be in Ottawa at the National Gallery of Canada, and all of our talks in person are live streamed, so you can tune in. And then we are back in Toronto on Tuesday, June 6th. We'll be here at the Isabel Bader Theatre for the Walrus Talks Digital Skills with Deloitte. And then in the next week or two, we'll be announcing more details on our final Walrus Talks of this season. Mark your calendars for Wednesday, June 28th. We will be doing a talk on AI, ChatGPT, what the heck is going on. That's going to be with Google here again at the Isabel Bader Theater. We encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. It's the best way to stay in touch with the Walrus and not miss a single event. For those of you in the room, on the way out, there's a table. You can sign in. We're also going to send you a follow-up email that includes those of you watching on the live stream, and you can opt in there. We encourage you to subscribe to the Walrus, and we have a special offer for those of you in the room, a full year subscription to the Walrus, 8 issues delivered right to your door, in your village, in your home, in your buildings, for just $25. So that Walrus table I mentioned, just stop by and the team will set you up. For 20 years now, the Walrus has been home to Canada's conversation. And gosh, in this increasingly complex world of shrinking newsrooms and encroaching media conglomerates, our work is more important than ever. We're indie, we're Canadian, and we are looking ahead to the next 20 years. And we do this work thanks to our community of support. So help us secure the future by making a donation. You can visit us at thewalrus.ca and click on donate, or again, that magical table that does so much. You can make a donation. We're a registered charity, so any gift, $20 or more, will receive a charitable tax receipt. Speaking of 20 years, I want to say a special thank you to the Chalkers Foundation. They're in the room tonight, Jim and Louisa specifically. Chalkers has been with us since day one. And also thank you to Chalkers board members and members of the Walrus board who are in the room tonight. Thanks again to Graham and the Concordia University team for making this conversation possible, but also for educating so many of us, not just in the community outreach, but also at the university. Thank you to our annual sponsors. That includes Air Canada, Inspire, and Rogers. And thank you all for attending in person and online. It's so great to see the energy back in our city, back in real life, back out in the streets. And you are all a part of the Walrus community. And that's ultimately what makes a great city, people and communities. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.